Today we're on Cleveland Street in Fitzroy, which in 1889 was the site of a scandal that rocked the nation. It started out quite by chance. In July of 1889 there had been theft from the London Central Telegraph Office that was under investigation by Constable Luke Hanks of the Confidential Inquiry Branch, the Post Office's police force. Yes, the Post Office had its own police force. During the course of the investigation, a telegraph boy named Charles Swinscoe was discovered to have 14 shillings in his possession, which, when adjusted for inflation, was the equivalent of quite a lot of money. A telegraph boy typically earned around 11 shillings a week. His job was to deliver messages to homes and businesses. Notably, though, they were not allowed to carry their own money, lest it get confused with clients' money, either by accident or deliberately. 14 shillings, or 18, depending which source you read, was a lot of cash that Swinscoe could not otherwise account for. Hanks brought Swinscoe in for questioning. Eventually, the 15-year-old boy confessed all. He denied stealing the money, but had a far wilder tale to tell. He was employed in an establishment at 19 Cleveland Street where, for 4 shillings at a time, gentlemen could, how would the tabloids put this, engage in sex acts. In other words, Swinscoe was earning a bit on the side as a bit on the side, working in a homosexual brothel. This was a serious matter. 1885 had seen the passage of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which, among other things, demanded a sentence of up to 2 years for any man engaged in gross indecency with another man. The Act never specified exactly what constituted gross indecency, but what it meant in practice was that for the first time, male homosexuality was effectively outright illegal. Before this, only specific sexual acts had been outlawed. Under the new Act, a sufficiently uptight judge might interpret almost anything that appeared remotely gay as worthy of imprisonment. Incidentally, lesbianism was fine. The Victorians were weird like that. So, Swinscoe was in big trouble. He named several other telegraph boys working at number 19. Interrogating them, Hanks discovered that the brothel was run by one Charles Hammond, who employed a young man named Henry Newlove as a procurer. This was far more interesting than some stupid theft from a telephone office or whatever, and Hanks took the matter further. Detective Inspector Abberline was assigned to the case. Now, if you know your lurid Victorian crimes, you'll recognise that name. Abberline had been the officer in charge of the Jack the Ripper case back in 1888. Even though the Ripper case remains unsolved to this day, Abberline had a reputation as a sharp detective and would receive a total of 84 commendations and awards over the course of his career. It's perhaps unfortunate that his most famous case was never solved, because it paints an unfair picture of the man. Abberline swooped on number 19 with a warrant for the arrest of Hammond, only to discover the house abandoned. Hammond had had a tip-off and fled for the coast. However, Abberline was able to nab the not-so-quick Newlove and Charles Thickbroom, another telegraph boy working at number 19. No, I didn't make that name up. Also arrested was Algernon Allies, a houseboy at the Marlborough Club. Abberline wasn't satisfied with this and had number 19 placed under observation in case Hammond returned. He didn't, but a regular customer, identified as Mr. Brown, did. The police trailed Mr. Brown home, only to discover that he was, in fact, Lord Arthur Somerset, son of the Duke of Beaufort. This scandal was getting saucier by the day. Newlove named another aristocratic client, Henry Fitzroy, Earl of Euston. I suppose at least he was supporting local business. Somerset was brought in for questioning twice, but the authorities were strangely slow to act, which gave his lordship time to abscond to France. So the only convictions actually made in the case were against the young employees of number 19, which caught the attention of a firebrand journalist named Ernest Park. Park was curious about the suspiciously light sentences passed down to the lads, and did a little digging. He published an article in the North London Press on the 28th of September, suggesting that there had been some sort of hullabaloo on Cleveland Street, there had been a cover-up, and that certain prominent aristocrats were in on it. He followed this up with another article on the 16th of November, specifically naming Fitzroy and accusing him of fleeing to Peru. Fitzroy sued for libel, as was the style at the time. Fitzroy claimed he thought number 19 contained naked women posing artistically, and was absolutely disgusted to discover the true nature of the place, and left right away, and it was just a coincidence that people had seen him there. What's wrong with that? Nothing whatever? However, witnesses disagreed on what they actually saw, and so Fitzroy got off scot-free. On the 16th of December, another trial began, this time for Arthur Newton, solicitor to Somerset and Newlove, who was accused of obstructing the course of justice by assisting Somerset in his escape, and possibly bribing the boys as well. He was charged, but received only 6 weeks in prison. While Newlove was on trial, Henry Labouchere, one of the MPs behind the Criminal Law Amendment Act, put a motion forward to investigate Park's allegation of a cover-up. In fact, on the 28th of February, 1890, he suggested that Lord Salisbury, the Prime Minister himself, was heavily involved in the cover-up. Salisbury hotly denied the accusation, but would later admit that he couldn't quite remember the whole affair. Subsequently released documentation shows that the PM, the Department of Public Prosecutions, the Treasury, the Attorney General, and the Lord Chancellor passed the case around like a hot potato. If they weren't actively covering the case up, it certainly appears that they were in no great hurry to deliver justice. Rumours were also circulating of an even higher-placed client at number 19. None other than Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, grandson of the Queen, and alleged inventor of the Prince Albert. Ask your parents. Some newspapers in America even outright stated that he was involved, though those in Britain were more clandestine. Nothing has ever been confirmed, and in fact some authorities suggest it was Newton who put the rumour about to take the heat off himself. Now, to understand why this was such a major affair, and why a cover-up might have been needed, you need to know a little more about the circumstances. You see, this goes beyond a mere celebrity indiscretion or even a criminal act. There was a widely held belief in Victorian Britain that homosexuality was an aristocratic vice, a belief that would come to the fore a couple of years after the scandal, in 1892, when Oscar Wilde was put on trial for that old favourite, gross indecency. His solicitor would be none other than Charles Newton. Equally importantly, telegraph boys were seen as more than mere errand runners. They were uniformed employees of the General Post Office, trusted guardians of information. It was a privileged position. The uniform gave them access to all sorts of business and private spaces. To obstruct them in their duties was punishable by fine. To procure them for sexual favours, therefore, was to subvert their professionalism and anonymity, and potentially to compromise their confidentiality. It was seen as nothing less than an attack on the values of society as a whole, especially for the Victorians who preferred to hide their sexual activities behind a prudish facade. The impact of the case was a wide one. It became something of a cause célèbre among radicals, who saw it as proof positive that those awful aristocrats were a blight on society with their unfettered gayness. It would impact the already negative views on homosexuality held by so-called respectable Victorians. Indeed, it may well have been a contributing factor in the sentencing of Oscar Wilde. Inspector Abberline would retire not long after the case, disgusted at the failure of justice and what appeared to be a cover-up to protect the powerful. Rumours about Prince Albert dogged him long after his death, and indeed persist to this day. So that's the story of Cleveland Street. a real-life cover-up conspiracy involving sex, crime, aristocracy, corruption and exploitation in Victorian London, with links to Queen Victoria, Oscar Wilde and Jack the Ripper. What a story. Sadly, though, you can't visit number 19 today. One interesting theory suggests that the house is actually number 18 and the houses were renumbered to destroy the site of aristocratic shame, but the facts contradict this. It's a cover-up too far. In fact, the house was roughly here, demolished a few years after the scandal to make way for an extension of the Middlesex Hospital, which itself has since been demolished. 19 Cleveland Street lives on only as a footnote in Britain's LGBT history.